Thank you very much to Anju Sharma ma'am and to Professor Pandya and to you for having me on this very esteemed panel. Whatever I have to say is possibly going to reinforce the content that the panelists before me have so very brought forward through the wisdom of their having been involved in the same space. There are two thoughts that I have with which I wish to begin, and then I thought it may be worthwhile for me to share my experience at a more microcosm level and draw some learnings out of it, so that these could possibly help shape the policy of how incubation happens. The two foremost thoughts that come to my mind of why India needs incubation. The first is what we teach in our core courses in strategic management at IIM. And being a professor of strategy, obviously I have to, exemplify. I'm sure I don't have time to do that, but the theory of institutional voids, as an emerging economy, unlike the Silicon Valley that we wish to replicate, the institutional context that we wish to build so that we may one day have multiple Silicon Valleys across our country, that change from previous institutions to new institutions, which is nothing but on the softer end, the culture, on the harder end, the regulations that Professor Desai talked about, it takes decades. And therefore, that incubation becomes an imperative which we cannot deny, irrespective of whether we are creating hubs or whatever we are doing. So incubation is a fundamental entity, an institution that becomes a market maker, such that great ideas that people at large in India and people across country are entrepreneurial. They may actually find, so that's one thought that I have of the theory of institutional void. The second is, which is something that Professor Gurumurthy and Professor Desai both brought out, which is about experience. And I'll begin, I have just 4 slides which I put together. And so I'll bring that thought out, and then I'll go into sharing my experience. Well, so one thing that we did, we took up our angel invest, we created a company, a not-for-profit company, and being a professor of strategy, we set ourselves, so don't bother about the next set of it, but the vision was to be trustees of innovation and entrepreneurship in service of humanity. So that's a very lofty ideal. But that's the way we are, and we measure our success on just 2 parameters. One is how many jobs we create, and the second is how much wealth we create. And there's no third parameter by which we measure our success. But most importantly, this is the broader thought. One of the failures, whether it is the failures of businesses or the failure of academic institutions, which the NEP is attempting to set right, and which is again brought out by my erstwhile presenters, is the inability to join academic world with the world of business. One deals with conceptual knowledge, the other deals with the practices. Their focus is solving day-to-day problems, whereas the other is building theories which are generic. So therefore, the incubation process becomes so eminently important, because I see that this is one where the incubator becomes a lab for students and various entrepreneurs across the length and breadth of humanity. I'm not even talking about nation or region. I'm saying anybody and everybody. And so it becomes a lab for us to not only test our theories, but to actually build knowledge so that the theory may get reinforced and that knowledge may help the incubated startups to be successful. So with that broad theme introduction, I'll go ahead and share just 3 slides of our experience. One is this, and to my mind, this is so important. When we talk about incubation, shall it be a center? Shall it be a standalone incubator, right? Or shall it actually be something that we call in the theory which is already developed, the theory of innovation, entrepreneurship, of ambidexterity? What does that mean, essentially? It means you look at our structure, and we took a lot of effort, and we are one of the later entrants in incubation. But let me say that we've been able to create wealth at the rate of 33% per annum. We've had 3 failures, but we have 15 successful startups which are creating phenomenal amount of wealth. We've been able to create about 400 odd jobs in the last 2.5 years. So what is it that I wish to leave behind with this panel on our experience with this structural issue? So let's say we build an incubator in an academic institution to facilitate the process of incubation. Now, the problem with academic institutions are they are very protocol and very rule driven. That is very good for efficiency. It creates phenomenal amount of effectiveness in generating the purpose for which they have been created, but that can be a best destroyer of innovation and entrepreneurship. Right? So, which Professor Uday also brought out in his discussions. But the incubator is about exploration, about innovation. So, why this structure? This has been celebrated structure, and we look at it in our courses in strategy. You look at the structure, the advantage of this. The advantage is that as a private company, we've created this. That gives us phenomenal amount of flexibility, which is not constrained by the regulations of the constitution or legislature. So you allow a wonderful idea to die unsupported, well, you can never revive it. And you cannot allow procedures and protocols to intervene in creating that infrastructure and support and taking decisions. And therefore, this structure, which is now deeply embedded in the theory of how we create entrepreneurship, so we've created this. So this is an independent company. It's a private company with its own BOD. But how does it derive benefit from here? There have to be linkages. So we've been able to do this very effectively. That's one structural mechanism. When we talk about strategy of incubation or strategy of building entrepreneurship, any textbook tells us that the first thing you've got to do is structure, and then you've got to talk about systems. So here I am talking to you about the structure of how, as an academic institution, our experiment with the structural mechanism to facilitate incubation has given success and is highly aligned to the theories thereof. Of course, this is our model of incubation that we put in place. Right. So, of course, there can be virtual incubation. There is a physical infrastructure. This slide shows us the physical infrastructure. Obviously, as a management institution, we can't boast of biotech labs. We can't boast of, but what we can do is we can support industry 4.0. We are deep into AI. Right? So a lot of my companies are the first time Indian technology creators. Right? They are exporting. They are doing very well. We've been able to create an AI lab, which basically for 3D printing and AI and stuff. And most importantly, we found that the fact that we give them just this much is not good enough. The enterprises fail for want of support, which they've never had. For instance, legal, accounting, how to file patents. I heard Madam Manju Sharma and Professor Himanshu Pandya talk about using this COVID period to train hundreds and thousands of people on filing a patent. But filing a patent is still a very engaging, involved, expensive process. So how can we go about? So what have we done is we've created a business services system where economies of scale have come, right? So all my startups are supported through the incubation process with this, because for me to hire these services is far easier because I spread them thin across all startups. And of course, as we all believe, the institutional void in India is of investment. How do we assess risk? So financial capital becomes a big deal. And the solution we found is by tapping into existing angel networks, tapping into alumni networks, and building a website that facilitates registration of angels and ensuring that somehow we become very exciting, and we train our startups to do pitches. Training and mentoring is fundamental. Go-to-market strategy, how to scale up, when to professionalize, when to give up control as entrepreneurs, and pass on controls to professionals. Often I've found, and the literature talks about failures. Out of the failures, one of the biggest failures of startups is the entrepreneurial mindset can become a failure. So you can be in entrepreneurial mode, you can be in growth mode, but you have to transit to professional mode. You've got to give up some control, don't you? And therefore, that becomes the other management training and guidance that we give. And of course, hiring and stuff is a big deal. So we provide them this kind of support. So capability building within the incubation, so that we may replicate the voids that the environment gives us. So we are that institution which is becoming a market maker. I hope that in a couple of decades, India will eliminate some of these institutional voids, and we will no longer need the incubators as we need them today. But today, you cannot eliminate incubator to facilitate startups. That's for sure. Lastly, where will the capital come from? Shall we always be on public funds, or shall we become self-sustaining, right? So therefore, the model that we've created, we receive some amount of DST funds, which are all right, they're helping us, but DST will not support us for all the time in future. And this is my last slide. So what did we do? We decided to augment our resources, because we bring intellectual capital of how to create startups, so we are today signed alliances with a lot of companies that are creating a lot of wealth, but have created a venture fund to create, ventures. So we do a huge amount of consulting for us. And I'm happy to report that this model, which we put in place just a couple of years back, is giving us enough resources to now be on our own, right? And continue to, of course, equity in these startups will give us capital so that we may continue to be fulfilling our objective of supporting startups. So that is here. But today we need short-term revenues to survive, to pay our salaries. So consulting and advisory, training, we have a grant coming from TST, but it is progressively reducing, and in 2 years it will be gone. And we do charge a fee for office space, and we've taken nothing more than that from the parent institution. And yes, we do take about 3 to 5% equity from our startups, and we do create a drag-on clause so that when we need the funds, we can they're constrained to buy it out in the next round of their valuation, so that we may create a corpus. And that's where we are building our capabilities. In fact, while I speak to you, there are already startups lined up for pitching, and we have a jury that we will be selecting some of these and then putting them up to angel investor networks for funding. So that's the way we've started. And I'm happy to report that we are finding a lot of patents. And if there is, I feel that these two models could be models of from where we could borrow, to how academia can sort of support this one. So with those few thoughts, thank you for giving me your patience here. That's all that I have to say, and back to you.